The desert wind howled across the barren Afghan plains as the convoy of armored vehicles rumbled to a halt at Fob Hawk, an isolated forward operating base nestled between jagged mountains and endless dust. The sun had already started its descent, washing the sky in muted gold and deep violet, the perfect camouflage for the dangers that came alive after dark. Sergeant Cole Matthews stepped down from the truck boots, meeting sand with a kind of heaviness only a soldier understands. Fresh from Fort Bragg with 3 tours under his belt, Cole was no stranger to war zones. But this time was different. This wasn't just another deployment. This was a personal decision, a volunteer mission to replace a fallen comrade. His best friend, Staff Sergeant Jake Nolan, had lost his life in an IED explosion 2 months ago. Cole had promised to finish what Jake had started. As the dust settled around him, Cole's eyes scanned the base. Barbed wire fences, watchtowers, silhouetted against the dying light sandbag bunkers and beyond the compound. The dark mountains, where unseen eyes always watched. War wasn't new to him, but the weight on his chest tonight wasn't fear. It was the realization that this time he wouldn't be alone. Parked beside the last Humvee was a military-grade kennel, bolted tight its inhabitant, barely visible through the grated door. A pair of sharp amber eyes met his. Calm, observant, and unsettlingly intelligent. The name stenciled on the side of the crate read, Rex, K9 Unit 217. Cole had read the report during the flight. A German shepherd, born and trained at Lackland Air Force Base, with 3 successful deployments under his harness. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier. A partner. A gruff voice broke the moment. "You must be Sergeant Matthews," said Master Sergeant Blake, the K9 unit handler in charge of Rex's last mission. "This here is Rex. Best nose in the Corps. Saved more lives than I can count." Cole walked over, kneeling in front of the crate, studying the animal behind the bars. Rex didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply tilted his head slightly as if measuring the new human in front of him. "You've got the job?" Buddy Cole whispered, more to himself than to Rex. Blake handed him the leash and unlatched the crate. Rex stepped out with military precision, sitting neatly by Cole's side, without a command. In that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, curiosity, and maybe even the first spark of the bond that would change both their lives forever. That night, under a sky littered with stars, and the occasional streak of artillery fire in the distance, Cole sat outside his tent. Rex lay quietly at his feet, ears twitching at every distant sound alert even at rest. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. They were both soldiers after all, both new to this chapter, both waiting for the war to call, and it would call sooner than either of them expected. Morning came early at FOB Hawk. The rising sun painted the horizon in pale orange, but the real wake-up call was the steady hum of helicopters slicing through the sky. Sergeant Cole, still adjusting to the desert routine, found himself standing in front of the K9 training field just after sunrise. His new partner was already waiting, tail still, ears perked, eyes locked on the instructor. Master Sergeant Blake stood at the center of the training ring, a worn-out baseball cap shadowing his face. His voice carried across the open space crisp and sharp, like the orders it delivered. "Rex isn't your pet, boys. He's your partner. His eyes and ears will see and hear things before you ever will. His instincts will keep you alive when your training fails. Trust the dog, even when you don't trust yourself." The soldiers gathered in a loose circle, some nodding with quiet respect, others side-eyeing the German shepherd, who sat motionless at Cole's side. There was no mistaking Rex's presence. He wasn't a barking, tail-wagging mascot. He was the embodiment of discipline, a soldier in fur. Blake pointed toward a nearby wall where scent boxes were lined up, each holding hidden explosives, contraband, or harmless decoys. One by one, the other dogs were sent forward, noses, working tails, twitching handlers at their side. Then it was Rex's turn. "Go, Rex!" Without hesitation, Rex darted forward, his snout sweeping along the boxes like a living radar. He paused at the third one, then set the silent alert signal. Blake walked over and cracked open the lid, revealing a mock IED trigger system buried in cloth. "Good boy, Rex. You saved another squad today." Cole couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, even though the bond was still new. When the other handlers came over to clap him on the back or offer words of admiration, he didn't respond. His eyes were still on Rex. Later that day, Cole visited the K9 kennels, curious to learn more about the dog that would soon share his life and possibly his death. A laminated plaque hung near Rex's enclosure, a summary of his service record. 3 tours, 12 confirmed life-saving alerts, countless patrols, no failed missions. As the sun set once again, Cole found himself back at the training field, watching Rex chase the fading light, with E's muscles moving like poetry in motion. He knew then that this wasn't just any dog. Rex had earned his place in the unit, and would soon earn his place in Cole's heart. And in the world they were about to step into, loyalty could mean the difference between life and death. The day Rex arrived at the military training facility, the air was thick with anticipation. The dusty training grounds, surrounded by high chain-link fences, echoed with the sounds of soldiers shouting commands, the rhythmic thud of boots hitting the dirt, and the occasional bark of a working dog. It was here that Rex would forge his path as a K9 unit, his skills honed to a razor-sharp edge, ready to serve in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Sergeant Cole Matthews stood at the edge of the training field, watching as the newest recruits took their first steps into the world of military working dogs. Rex was among them, his coat shiny and his eyes wide with curiosity. At just 2 years old, Rex was already a seasoned tracker and protection dog, but now it was time for him to face the rigors of military training. Cole had seen many dogs come and go, but something about Rex stood out. The German Shepherd was calm, collected, and yet had a fire within him. His intelligence shone through in every interaction, and Cole knew without a doubt that Rex had the potential to be one of the best. But potential wasn't enough in this line of work. It had to be tested. The training ground was a brutal place where the margin for error was razor thin. Dogs were taught to track scents, detect explosives, and protect their handlers at all costs. They were trained to be both fierce and loyal, a delicate balance that took time to master. But Rex was quick to learn, and each day spent in training brought him closer to becoming the partner Cole needed. On the first day, Cole worked one-on-one with Rex, getting to know his instincts and capabilities. He gave the dog commands, watched his responses, and tested his ability to focus. Rex responded with unwavering attention, his keen nose sniffing the air, searching for the faintest of scents. He moved with purpose, a soldier in the making. The first test for Rex came sooner than expected. A simulated explosive search had been set up in the training field, and Cole, along with several other handlers, stood at the ready. The air was thick with tension as the trainers set the course. It wasn't just about finding the hidden explosive materials, it was about teaching the dogs how to respond to danger. Rex was first to step forward, his ears pricked and tail stiff. The scent of chemicals and gunpowder hung in the air, but Rex seemed unfazed. He walked slowly, methodically, his nose brushing the ground, then the air as he followed the faint trail. The other dogs had already made mistakes, losing focus or rushing through the search, but not Rex. He moved with precision, his every step calculated. As Rex neared a pile of debris, his posture stiffened. He paused, sniffed the air again, then dropped to the ground, signaling to Cole that he had found something. Cole's heart raced. This wasn't just a drill. This was a test of their teamwork, their bond. Cole approached cautiously, placing a hand on Rex's shoulder. He gently nudged the dog forward, and together they uncovered the hidden explosives, a near-perfect find. The trainers were impressed. Rex had passed his first real test, and Cole couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. But this was only the beginning. The real test would come later when they were in the field in the heat of battle. For now, though, Cole was content to see Rex's skills developing. They were learning together, growing into a team that would face the dangers of war side by side. Over the following weeks, the pair endured grueling exercises. They traversed obstacle courses, hunted down hidden scents, and worked tirelessly to refine their skills. Each day was a step closer to becoming the perfect K9 unit. Through it all, Rex's intelligence and determination stood out. He was quick to learn commands and even quicker to adapt to changing circumstances. In a world where soldiers relied on their K9 partners for their lives, Rex was proving himself worthy of the trust placed in him. As the days passed, Cole found himself developing a deeper bond with the dog. They were more than just handler and animal. They were becoming brothers in arms. Rex was learning to trust Cole's commands, to read his body language, to know when to fight and when to retreat. And Cole was learning to trust Rex's instincts, to recognize the signs when the dog sensed danger long before he could. By the time Rex had completed his final training test, the bond between them was unbreakable. They were no longer two separate entities. They were one. A team forged through sweat trust and a shared understanding of the dangers that lay ahead. With their training complete, Cole and Rex were ready for the next phase of their journey. They would soon be deployed to the front lines where the real tests would begin. But whatever challenges lay ahead, Cole knew one thing for sure. Rex would be by his side, and together, they would face the fight of their lives. The sun had barely risen on the day that would change everything. The hum of the base came alive with activity as soldiers scrambled to prepare for a new mission. The horizon was still pink, the air cool, but the tension in the camp was palpable. This wasn't just another patrol. This was the kind of mission that meant real combat, and every soldier knew it. Sergeant Cole Matthews stood at the edge of the barracks, Rex by his side leash held loosely in his hand. The canine's sharp eyes scanned the base with calculated precision, ears flicking at every sound. It was as though the dog was already in the field preparing for whatever lay ahead. For Cole, it was a strange comfort to have Rex at his side. In the chaos of war, the bond between them had formed faster than he could have imagined, and he knew that Rex would be his anchor through the chaos. Master Sergeant Blake approached his expression as unreadable as ever. He glanced at Rex, then locked eyes with Cole. Sergeant Matthews Blake said, his voice low but firm, "We've been given orders. We're heading to the front lines. Intel suggests the Taliban is moving supply routes through the valley. Our job is to intercept and prevent them from getting any further." Cole nodded without hesitation. He had trained for moments like this. He had lived for moments like this. The adrenaline of a real mission, where every decision could be the last. But now, with Rex at his side, he felt a deeper weight on his shoulders. This wasn't just his life on the line. It was Rex's too. "Let's do this," Cole muttered to himself. Blake turned to the rest of the unit, giving the command. The men gathered their gear, checked their weapons, and double-checked the equipment. Rex stood still at Cole's side, his movements smooth and efficient, like he had done this 1,000 times before. As the convoy rolled out of the base and into the rugged terrain, Cole felt the familiar rhythm of war settling in. The harsh desert landscape stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving, the only sounds the engine hums and the occasional rattle of a distant rifle shot. The convoy moved slowly, carefully, knowing that any moment could trigger an ambush. Rex's nose was constantly twitching, scanning the air for any scent that didn't belong. His ears remained alert, listening for sounds that would betray the enemy's presence. Cole kept a hand on Rex's harness, his bond with the dog, stronger than any training. Rex's instincts were sharp, and he trusted them as much as he trusted his own. The tension in the air was thick, but it was nothing new. It was a soldier's life, constant vigilance, the anticipation of an enemy strike, and the knowledge that at any moment the mission could turn into a fight for survival. As the convoy neared the valley, Blake signaled for them to slow down. Cole and Rex moved to the front of the unit, scanning the terrain ahead. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark and imposing, and the valley below was dotted with jagged rocks and scattered boulders. Rex stopped suddenly, his body rigid. His eyes locked on a distant patch of brush. Cole's instincts kicked in. He raised his fist, signaling the convoy to halt. Everything slowed. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The convoy was still. The only movement was Rex, whose body remained locked in position, every muscle in his frame ready to spring into action. Cole's eyes followed Rex's line of sight, searching for the danger that the dog had already identified. In that moment, Cole knew the war was just beginning, and Rex would be the one to keep them alive. The stillness of the valley was broken by the sound of distant gunfire. It wasn't an ambush, not yet, but the sharp cracks of rifle shots were enough to raise the hairs on the backs of every soldier's neck. Sergeant Cole Matthews stood at the front of the convoy, his eyes scanning the rugged landscape. The dry wind cut through the valley, carrying with it the faintest scent of smoke. But it wasn't the smell of a fire, it was the unmistakable scent of gunpowder drifting on the wind. Rex, his canine partner, had already sensed something. The dog's body was tense, and his amber eyes fixed on a distant outcrop of boulders. It wasn't the first time Rex had reacted like this, and Cole didn't need to ask. He trusted the dog's instincts. Blake's voice came through Cole's radio, low but steady. "Sergeant Matthews, we've got company." The convoy slowed to a crawl as Blake ordered the men into position. Cole motioned for Rex to stay close, his hand gripping the dog's harness. The unit spread out, using the terrain for cover, as the sound of gunfire grew louder. The Taliban had set up a small outpost in the valley, a hidden supply route they had been using to smuggle weapons and ammunition into the region. Cole felt the weight of his rifle in his hands as he crouched behind a large boulder, taking a moment to steady his breathing. Rex was still at his side, alert and unwavering. The dog's presence was more than just a comfort now. It was a lifeline. Every movement, every sound, every shift in the air was analyzed by Rex before it even reached Cole's senses. From his vantage point, Cole could see the faint outline of Taliban fighters moving between the rocks. Their figures were barely visible, but the distinctive silhouettes of rifles and the way they moved in unison gave them away. They were well trained, prepared for an ambush. Blake signaled, and the unit began their approach. A calculated maneuver designed to box the enemy in. The fire from the Taliban was sporadic, but Cole could hear the sharp crack of bullets as they whizzed past the rocks, narrowly missing their targets. The tension in the air was thick, each second stretching into eternity. Cole's eyes were focused on the enemy position, but his attention was never far from Rex. The dog's nose twitched, and for a split second, Cole wondered if Rex could smell the exact location of each Taliban fighter, a sixth sense honed from years of training. Suddenly, Rex broke from Cole's side, moving faster than Cole could react. The dog's instincts had taken over. Without a command, Rex sprinted toward the enemy position, cutting through the rocks with lethal precision. Cole shouted his voice, drowned out by the gunfire, but Rex was already ahead of him, too fast to catch. The first round of shots rang out, but Rex was already in motion, dodging and weaving through the rocks. The Taliban fighters, surprised by the sudden attack, began firing wildly. But Rex was a blur of motion, his sharp senses guiding him toward the nearest fighter. The dog pounced, sinking his teeth into the man's leg with a savage bite, pulling him to the ground. Cole, now in full pursuit, charged after Rex's rifle raised. He caught sight of the remaining Taliban fighters as they scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. The K-9 had already created chaos in their ranks. Rex had done his job, and now it was time for the soldiers to finish it. With the element of surprise lost, the Taliban fighters were quickly overwhelmed by the coordinated attack from the convoy. One by one, the enemy soldiers were either captured or neutralized, their position no longer tenable. As the firefight subsided, Cole stood over Rex, who was panting, heavily bloodied but unharmed. The dog had saved his life. Again. Rex's instincts had turned the tide of the battle just as they had countless times before. Cole knelt beside him, resting a hand on the dog's head, the bond between them deepening with every passing moment. "You did, good buddy." Cole muttered, his voice filled with gratitude. Rex's tail wagged once, then he returned to his alert stance, scanning the area for any remaining threats. Cole knew that this was only the beginning. The valley was still full of danger, but with Rex at his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. The after effects of the skirmish still hung in the air. The distant sound of combat had faded, leaving only the silence that seemed to envelop the valley. The soldiers were still on high alert, moving cautiously, making sure there were no hidden Taliban forces waiting to strike again. Sergeant Cole Matthews scanned the horizon, his gaze shifting from the remnants of the enemy's position to the weary faces of his men. The convoy had taken a hit, but their mission was far from over. They still needed to secure the route, gather intelligence, and make sure nothing was left behind for the Taliban to use against them. Rex was at Cole's side, his nose twitching as he took in the familiar scent of battle. The dog's body remained poised and alert, but there was a sense of fatigue in his movements. Even the strongest K-9s need time to recover. Cole placed a reassuring hand on Rex's harness, silently thanking the dog for saving his life. Once again, the rest of the team began to regroup, their bodies stiff from the fight, but determined to press forward. Blake's voice came over the comms, his tone measured and steady. "Matthews, we need to keep moving. Let's push through the valley. No more delays." Cole acknowledged the order, his gaze lingering on Rex for a moment longer. There was something in the dog's eyes, an unspoken understanding that the danger wasn't over. Rex always knew when trouble was near, even when the soldiers around him couldn't sense it. The bond they shared ran deeper than mere training. With a nod, Cole signaled the team to move out. They made their way through the valley, taking the safest route possible. But the valley was a natural trap. Its narrow passages and rocky terrain made it the perfect location for an ambush. Despite the calculated movements of the unit, they couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Just as they neared the next ridge, the sound of a gunshot rang out. It wasn't just one shot. There were several, each one echoing off the rocks and drawing the attention of every soldier. Cole instinctively dropped to a crouch, his rifle aimed in the direction of the fire. His eyes scanned the horizon, but there was nothing visible. The enemy had found a new position, one that Cole hadn't anticipated. Rex's ears perked up. The K9's nose flared, and in a flash he darted forward, moving at a speed that only a well-trained dog could achieve. The sound of his paws against the rocky ground was drowned out by the ongoing fire from the Taliban. Cole wasn't sure where the attack had come from, but he trusted Rex's instincts. The dog was moving with purpose, darting between rocks and boulders. It didn't take long before Rex had closed the distance, his movements swift and precise. He was headed toward an outcrop of rocks that had been partially concealed by the dust kicked up from the firefight. Cole shouted for his team to follow, but they were met with more gunfire, a barrage of bullets forcing them to take cover. The Taliban were adapting, trying to push them into a vulnerable position. Rex's actions were now the focal point. The dog had a knack for locating enemies before anyone else could. It wasn't just training, it was his bond with Cole. Every shift in the wind, every sound in the distance, Rex could sense it before it reached human ears. Cole followed closely behind, watching as Rex carefully moved through the rocks. A flash of movement caught his eye. A figure barely visible crouched behind a large stone. The Taliban had set up an ambush, one that was now crumbling under the force of Rex's assault. The dog lunged forward, taking down the soldier with a precision strike that sent the man tumbling into the rocks. Cole reached the position a moment later, raising his rifle to neutralize the remaining threats. It was over in seconds. The Taliban had underestimated the K9's abilities, and now they were paying the price. With the last of the enemy combatants subdued, Cole exhaled slowly. He knelt beside Rex, who was already on guard, his body tense, waiting for the next move. The dog's fur was matted with dust and dirt, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the battlefield. "Good work, buddy," Cole thought, his heart swelling with gratitude. Once again, Rex had turned the tide of battle. The bond they shared had proven stronger than any ambush or enemy fire. The sun was beginning to set over the horizon as Sergeant Cole Matthews and Rex prepared for their first real test together. The bond between them had grown stronger each day, but this training exercise would be the ultimate trial, a test to see if they truly understood each other, if they were ready to be a team in the field. The course was simple in design, a mock battlefield set up to simulate an ambush. The soldiers, dressed in full gear, would need to navigate through the terrain while facing various simulated threats. Their K9 partners would be tested not only on their ability to track scents, but also on their response to danger and their protection skills. For Rex, this was the moment he had been preparing for since the day he stepped onto the training grounds. The dog had already shown incredible potential, but now it was time to prove his worth under pressure. Cole gave Rex a final pat on the head before the exercise began, silently acknowledging the trust he placed in his dog. Rex's eyes locked with his as though to say, "I've got this." The exercise kicked off with a loud command signaling the start. Soldiers moved quickly through the simulated battlefield, their rifles ready, scanning for any sign of enemy movement. Rex stayed close to Cole's side, his ears forward and his nose working overtime to sniff out any hidden threats. His focus was unwavering. The first test was a scent trail, a trail left by the mock enemy. The goal was to track it down and report the location. The soldiers moved quickly, their boots crunching on the gravel, but Rex was even faster. His nose twitched as he caught the first whiff of the scent, and within moments he was moving with precision, following the trail through the uneven terrain. Cole kept pace behind him, but it was clear that Rex was leading the way. The dog's instincts were spot on, and his training kicked in as he navigated the twists and turns of the mock battlefield. He wasn't just following a scent, he was thinking, processing every step, calculating where the trail might have gone. He was a step ahead, and Cole could only marvel at how quickly Rex had adapted. They reached the location where the trail had ended, and Rex paused, looking back at Cole. His tail was still, but his eyes were locked onto the spot ahead. Cole knew what that meant. The threat was near. Before Cole could react, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the ambush. The enemy soldiers, hidden behind rocks and trees, began firing at the team. It was a realistic simulation, and the goal was not just to find the enemy, but to respond to the danger. Rex immediately sprang into action. He positioned himself between Cole and the gunfire, his body tense and ready. The dog's protective instincts were clear. He was here to guard his handler to keep Cole safe. Cole moved quickly, taking cover behind a large rock. He raised his rifle and returned fire, but his eyes never left Rex. The dog had already calculated their next move, his head swiveling as he watched for any movement in the enemy's position. The ambush was intense, but Cole knew they had to hold their ground. Rex was calm, even in the heat of battle. The dog's presence was a reassuring force as the soldiers moved to flank the enemy. Rex's ability to remain focused to protect Cole while tracking down the enemy had proven invaluable. As the training exercise concluded and the simulated threat was neutralized, Cole couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. Rex had passed the test not just as a tracker but as a protector and a partner. They were no longer just handler and dog. They were a team working together in ways that went beyond training. The bond that had formed between them was real, and it would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Cole knelt down beside Rex, his hand resting on the dog's harness. "You did good, buddy," he thought. Together they had proven that they were ready for the real test to come. The sun was still barely rising over the rugged terrain of Afghanistan when the call came in. The sky above was heavy with a mix of smoke and dust, the remnants of last night's skirmishes. The air felt thick, charged with the unspoken knowledge that today would be like no other. For Sergeant Cole Matthews and his K-9 partner Rex, the calm before the storm was a fleeting illusion. Cole was just finishing his morning routine, the sounds of soldiers preparing for another day echoing across the camp. His boots were tied tight, rifle-checked, and eyes scanning the horizon as Rex sat at his side, his muzzle resting on his paws. The bond between them had only grown since the first mission, and there was an unspoken understanding in the way Rex tilted his head when Cole gave the slightest nod. Then the radio crackled to life, cutting through the air like a blade. Blake's voice was strained, urgent. "Matthews, get ready! We've got a situation. A high-value target is on the move. Intel reports they're heading toward the mountain pass. We need to intercept them before they escape." Cole's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just another mission. This was a direct order to eliminate one of the Taliban's most notorious commanders, a man responsible for countless lives lost and uncountable atrocities. A target that could shift the balance of the entire region. Without missing a beat, Cole moved into action. He didn't need orders repeated. He didn't need time to prepare. He knew what needed to be done. He motioned to Rex, who was already on his feet, his muscles taut, ready for whatever lay ahead. The bond between man and dog was undeniable, a symbiosis of intent, focus, and unbreakable trust. The air grew heavier with each passing minute as the convoy revved up their engines, their military trucks kicking up dust behind them. The unit moved quickly, weapons at the ready, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Rex was in his element now, his body poised to act at the first sign of danger. His ears twitched at every sound, his eyes scanning the environment with unnerving precision. As they neared the mountain pass, Cole felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. He knew the terrain like the back of his hand, but today there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. The Taliban had been active in these mountains, setting traps and using the rocky cliffs to their advantage. Every step forward was a risk, and Cole could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Rex, sensing the same danger, growled low in his throat. "Stay sharp," Cole muttered under his breath, his eyes never leaving the rugged path ahead. The convoy moved slowly, navigating the treacherous terrain. Every rock, every shadow could hide an enemy. The closer they got to the mountain, past the more Cole could feel the anticipation building. Then, without warning, the sound of gunfire shattered the silence. It was close. Too close. "Contact!" Blake's voice rang through the radio. "Take cover!" A volley of bullets slammed into the ground around them, the whizzing sound of fire cutting through the air. The Taliban had set up an ambush. The convoy was under fire. Cole's instincts kicked in. He dove to the ground, pulling Rex with him as the bullets flew. The K-9 immediately sprang into action, his training taking over, as he positioned himself between Cole and the danger, ready to protect his handler at all costs. Cole rolled to his feet, drawing his weapon as he scanned the terrain for the enemy. The sounds of gunfire were deafening. The Taliban fighters were well hidden, using the mountainside to launch their assault. They were trained strategic, but they had underestimated one thing: Rex. Cole's eyes met Rex's, and in that moment there was no need for words. The K-9 understood. Rex was already moving, darting between rocks with incredible speed, his nose picking up the scent of the enemy before they could even get a shot off. Cole followed closely, using his training and intuition to keep up. "Rex, flank left!" Cole shouted, and without hesitation, Rex veered off to the left, his movements fluid as he charged toward the enemy's position. His powerful legs propelled him forward, his eyes locked on his target. Cole wasn't far behind, but he knew the dog was faster. Faster than any man, faster than any machine. Rex burst into the Taliban's hidden position like a force of nature. The gunfire ceased for a split second as the fighters realized they were being flanked by a highly trained K-9. One of them attempted to raise a weapon, but Rex was already there, his teeth sinking into the man's arm, knocking the rifle from his grip. Cole arrived just in time to take down another fighter who was aiming his weapon at Rex. He fired with precision, taking out the threat before it could even get a shot off. The rest of the Taliban fighters were disoriented, their ambush turned on its head. Within minutes, the convoy had regrouped, and the enemy was in full retreat. The mission wasn't over yet, but this skirmish had given Cole and Rex the upper hand. As the dust settled, Blake's voice came through the radio, his tone relieved but still sharp. "Matthews, we've got the upper hand for now, but the target is still on the move. We need to move fast. Can you track him?" Cole looked down at Rex, his heart pounding. Rex's tail wagged slightly, his body tense, ready to track the target down. With no time to waste, Cole nodded. "Let's finish this." The chase was on. The air buzzed with tension, the dust kicked up by the convoy's tires, mixing with the gunpowder scent that still lingered in the atmosphere. Cole's heart raced as the urgency of the mission settled in. They couldn't afford to lose the target now, not when they were so close. Rex was in his element. The K-9's nostrils flared, his ears pulled back, and his muscles rippled beneath his coat as he surged ahead, guided by instincts honed over countless training sessions. He was more than just a dog. He was a hunter, and the target was in his sights. Cole and Rex moved together, a well-oiled machine, their bond deepening with every step. As the convoy spread out, soldiers took up positions scanning for threats, while Rex led the charge, his nose cutting through the air like a blade. The scent trail was fresh, unmistakable. They were on the right path. "Stay sharp," Matthews Blake's voice crackled through the radio. "They're not going to make this easy." Cole gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening around his rifle. He knew the Taliban wouldn't just roll over. They were experts at escaping into the rugged terrain, disappearing into the mountains, as if they were part of the landscape. But Rex? Rex would find them. He was their best chance. The terrain was unforgiving. Steep cliffs, rocky outcrops, and the occasional boulder field made it harder to move quickly, but Rex didn't slow. He bounded over the uneven ground, his paws hitting the dirt with the certainty of a veteran. His focus was unyielding, his determination palpable in every muscle. Cole followed just behind his breath, coming in shallow bursts as he navigated the treacherous path. He could hear the rustle of wind through the mountains, the distant crack of gunfire, and the rhythmic sound of Rex's paws hitting the earth. Then a sudden shift. Rex's ears perked up. He stopped dead in his tracks, his body tense and poised for action. "Rex?" Cole whispered urgently. His eyes scanned the surroundings, every sense heightened. The stillness around them felt wrong. It happened in the blink of an eye. The Taliban had set another trap. An ambush. Gunfire erupted from the high ground, the sharp crack of assault rifles slicing through the air as soldiers dropped behind cover. The enemy had planned for this. They'd anticipated the pursuit. "Get down!" Cole shouted, diving behind a large boulder just as a bullet whizzed past his head. He grabbed Rex by the collar, pulling him to the ground as another round fired, striking the boulder beside them. Rex's low growl rumbled in his throat, his eyes locked onto the cliffside where the fire had come from. His tail was still, his body poised for the hunt. Cole took a deep breath. They had to move. They couldn't afford to stay exposed. He knew this was a test, not just of Rex's skills, but of his own resolve. They had to outsmart the enemy, and they had to do it quickly. "Rex, stay with me," Cole said through gritted teeth. He peered around the boulder, scanning the ridgeline for movement. The Taliban fighters were well positioned, hidden in the rocky outcrops above them. But they had made one crucial mistake. They hadn't accounted for Rex's ability to track and outmaneuver them. "Move up," Cole barked. "Get to the right flank." Rex reacted instantly, his eyes never leaving the enemy's position. He darted to the right, his body moving with fluid precision, while Cole followed closely behind his rifle, raised his senses on high alert. The moment the dog moved, Cole knew the fight had shifted in their favor. The rocks beneath them cracked and shifted as they advanced, their steps heavy and purposeful. The soldiers' fire was sporadic, now no longer as coordinated as before. They were panicked, and when people panic, they make mistakes. Rex wasn't just tracking the scent of the enemy anymore. He was predicting their movements. He was watching them, reading them, anticipating what they would do next. As Cole and Rex crept closer to the enemy position, a voice from above shouted a warning in Pashto. It was too late. Rex was already on the move, and before the Taliban fighters could react, he was upon them. In an explosion of motion, Rex leaped at the nearest fighter, his teeth sinking into the man's arm before he could raise his weapon. The shock of the attack sent the enemy into disarray, and Cole fired his rifle, taking down one of the men attempting to retreat. The remaining fighters scrambled, trying to regroup, but it was clear they had underestimated Rex. The K9's speed and aggression had thrown their entire plan into chaos. They were no longer in control. Rex, with his focus unshaken, held the man in place until Cole could get to him. "Stay down." Cole commanded, his voice steady, even as his heart raced. The Taliban fighter looked up at him, fear in his eyes, his rifle lying useless at his side. Cole's eyes met Rex's, and the dog's expression was one of quiet intensity. They had won this round. But the chase wasn't over. Not yet. The high-value target was still somewhere out there, slipping further into the mountains. They had to keep going. "Let's finish this," Cole muttered to Rex, who gave a soft, approving growl as he moved forward, nose to the ground once more. The mountain pass loomed ahead, a narrow, treacherous path carved into the jagged cliffs. The air was thin and crisp, each breath a reminder of how unforgiving the landscape could be. Cole and Rex had been tracking the Taliban fighters for hours, their pace relentless, their focus sharp. But as they approached the pass, a new weight pressed down on Cole. The realization that this was it. This was the final stretch. He looked down at Rex, who was moving with determined purpose, his tail stiff, his ears forward, nostrils flaring as he picked up the faintest of scents. Rex's senses were unparalleled, and Cole had no doubt that they were closing in on their target. But the pass wasn't just an obstacle, it was a trap waiting to happen. "Stay alert," Cole muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The air was eerily still, and even though the sun was now high in the sky, the shadows in the pass seemed to stretch and twist, creating an unsettling feeling deep in his gut. Rex slowed his pace, his body lowering as he sniffed the ground, his movements cautious. Something was wrong. Cole could feel it in the pit of his stomach. The Taliban had likely set up more than just one ambush. They had to know that someone was coming for them. They were masters of the terrain, blending into the mountains like ghosts, setting traps to turn the hunters into the hunted. Before Cole could react, Rex let out a low growl, his ears flicking in the direction of a sudden sound. A rock slide. The mountain had betrayed them. It came down in a cascade of rubble, blocking the only escape route. "Move!" Cole shouted, but the danger was already upon them. The Taliban had anticipated the pass being the bottleneck, the perfect place for an ambush. Gunfire erupted from above, the sound of it ricocheting off the cliffs. Cole dove for cover, pulling Rex with him as a volley of bullets slammed into the ground where they'd been standing only moments before. The echo of the gunfire rang in his ears, but there was no time to waste. They had to move, and fast. "Get to the rocks!" Cole ordered, pointing to a cluster of boulders to the left. Rex darted ahead, his body a blur as he weaved through the debris, moving with uncanny agility, dodging bullets and rocks alike. Cole was close behind, his weapon raised, scanning for targets. The enemy fighters were well hidden, perched on the cliffs above, using the terrain to their advantage. But Cole knew the terrain better. He had studied it, trained for moments like this. He understood the rhythm of the mountains, the way the wind shifted, the way the rocks could provide cover or betray a man's movements. Rex, his eyes fixed on the target, was already moving toward the enemy's position. He darted to the right, his nose sniffing the air, searching for any hint of their location. Then, like a streak of lightning, he charged toward one of the Taliban fighters, leaping up the rocks and biting down hard on the man's leg. The fighter screamed, but Rex didn't let go. His grip was firm, his strength unmatched as he dragged the man off the cliffside, pulling him down into the valley below. The man's rifle fell to the ground, useless in the face of the K9's fury. Cole didn't wait to see the outcome. He pressed forward, moving from cover to cover, his rifle trained on the cliffs. The fighters had regrouped, but they hadn't expected Rex's assault. They were panicking, firing blindly, their movements erratic. Cole's heart was pounding in his chest as he rounded a corner and spotted the high-value target. The Taliban commander, the one they'd been chasing all along. He was cornered, his back pressed against a rock, his eyes wild with desperation as he fumbled for his weapon. Rex was already there, his jaws snapping shut around the man's wrist before he could raise his rifle. The commander tried to shake the dog off, but Rex held firm, his teeth sinking deeper into the flesh. The man screamed in pain, but he was no match for the K9's raw power. Cole wasted no time. He closed the distance, his rifle aimed straight at the target. The Taliban commander looked up at him, fear flashing in his eyes. "You're done," Cole said, his voice cold as ice. Without hesitation, he squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, and the commander collapsed lifeless to the ground. But the battle wasn't over. The remaining fighters, furious and desperate, continued to fight from their hidden positions. Rex, with his unrelenting drive, wasn't finished either. He continued to pursue the remaining enemies, his instincts guiding him with terrifying precision. Cole moved swiftly, clearing the path and neutralizing the remaining threats. The K9's presence was like a wave crashing down on the enemy, relentless and unforgiving. Within minutes, the last of the Taliban fighters were either taken down or scattered into the wilderness. As the echoes of the battle faded into the mountains, Cole took a deep breath, his body tense with adrenaline. They had done it. They had eliminated the target and decimated the Taliban's forces in the pass. Rex stood by his side, his chest heaving, eyes scanning the area, but his body slowly relaxed as he sensed the end of the fight. The two of them stood together in the quiet aftermath, their bond stronger than ever before. But Cole knew this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and there would be more dangers ahead. But for now they had won. The sound of gunfire still rang in Cole's ears as he stood among the wreckage of the ambush. The mountain pass, once a quiet, foreboding place, was now a battlefield. Blood staining the rocks, the scent of smoke thick in the air. Cole wiped the sweat from his brow, his fingers still trembling from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But the job wasn't done. Not by a long shot. "We're not out of this yet," Cole muttered under his breath, his eyes darting over the terrain. The mission had been a success. They'd taken down the Taliban commander, but their escape route was still under heavy threat. The rest of the enemy force wasn't far behind. And with the pass so narrow, there was only one way out. Through it. "Rex, stay close." Cole commanded, his voice low but urgent. The K9's ears perked up at the command, and he immediately trotted to Cole's side, his body alert and poised for whatever came next. Rex's senses were still on high alert, his fur bristling with anticipation, as if he too understood the danger lurking just beyond the rocks. Cole scanned the ridgeline above, watching for any sign of movement. The Taliban fighters who'd survived the ambush would be regrouping, and they weren't about to let their target slip away so easily. The cliffs on both sides of the pass were steep and unforgiving, but they offered perfect cover for the enemy to launch a deadly pursuit. The urgency in Cole's chest surged. They needed to get moving. Fast. Without another word, Cole set off toward the pass's narrow exit, Rex right on his heels. Every step felt like a gamble, every turn a potential trap. Cole's breath came in shallow gasps, but his focus never wavered. They couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. "Move! Move! Move!" Cole shouted, his voice breaking the tense silence that had fallen over the mountainside. They had seconds, maybe minutes, before the enemy closed in. The only way to survive was to outrun them. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of rifle fire cut through the air. Bullets whizzed past, the force of them whipping through the wind, and Cole's heart leaped in his chest. The ambush wasn't over. It had only just begun. "Behind us!" Cole yelled, his body reacting before his mind could fully process the danger. He dove to the side, pulling Rex with him as a burst of gunfire from the cliffs above tore through the air, narrowly missing them. Cole's eyes shot upward, his pulse racing. The Taliban fighters had taken higher ground, positioned perfectly to catch them in a crossfire. The enemy was closing in, fast, but Cole wasn't about to go down without a fight. He scrambled to his feet, his rifle raised, and returned fire with precision. Each shot fired from the hip, each bullet finding its mark. The gunfire from the enemy paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Cole to spot the opening they needed. "Rex, go!" Cole shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. Without hesitation, Rex surged forward, his powerful legs propelling him into the fray. The K9's speed was unmatched, his agility a blur of motion as he darted across the open ground, his target locked on the nearest fighter. The Taliban operative barely had time to react before Rex was on him, sinking his teeth into the man's shoulder, forcing him to the ground in a flash of fur and fury. The man screamed in agony as Rex's jaws tightened, and for a moment the entire world seemed to freeze in place. But there was no time to savor the victory. The remaining fighters were closing in. They could hear the sound of the enemy's boots hitting the rocks, the harsh breaths of men who had come to finish what they'd started. Cole didn't hesitate. He knew the only way out was through the chaos. He bolted forward. Rex still clamped onto the man, dragging him off to the side as Cole took aim at another figure emerging from the shadows of the cliffside. A shot rang out and the fighter crumpled to the ground, his rifle slipping from his hands. "Rex on me!" Cole barked, his voice full of command. Rex, as if hearing the call, released his grip on the downed fighter and bounded to Cole's side. They were a team, a deadly unstoppable force. But the path was narrowing. The rocky terrain was closing in, and with each step they took, the walls of the mountain pass seemed to grow taller, more confining. The exit was still within reach, but it was guarded, and more Taliban soldiers were rushing in from the other side. A fresh wave of gunfire erupted from behind, forcing Cole and Rex to dive into the safety of a narrow crevice in the cliffside. The bullets thudded into the rocks above them, sending debris raining down. Cole's heart pounded in his chest as he pressed his back to the cool stone, trying to catch his breath. Rex, ever vigilant, remained. At his side, his body tense, ready for the next command. "We're almost there," Cole whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. His mind raced, weighing their options. They couldn't stay here forever. They needed a plan. And fast. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Cole's heart skipped a beat. The enemy had positioned themselves, strategically cutting off any chance of escape. They were cornered. Then out of nowhere, Cole heard it. The unmistakable whir of a helicopter approaching. His pulse surged. It was a rescue team. They'd come for them. But they had no time to wait. "We're going for it," Cole growled, his eyes flashing with determination. With a quick nod to Rex, Cole sprang from the crevice, charging forward. The sound of enemy fire followed them like a storm, but Cole and Rex didn't stop. They ran, their every move, calculated, their every breath desperate. The escape was a race against time, a desperate bid for survival. The helicopter was close, now its blades roaring above the pass. But the enemy wasn't giving up without a fight. They fired again, but Cole and Rex were already closing in on the clearing, the sound of the chopper growing louder with each passing second. Just as the first blast of gunfire rang out, Cole dove into the open, shouting to the pilot to lift off. Rex was already on his heels, the K-9's body pushing forward with the force of a freight train. The helicopter surged into the sky, the mountains disappearing beneath them. But as Cole looked down at the rugged terrain below, he knew one thing. This was far from over. The Taliban would never stop hunting them. Not until the mission was complete. And that meant Cole and Rex had more to fight for. The roar of the helicopter blades filled the air as it ascended higher, pulling Cole and Rex away from the chaos below. They'd made it barely. The mountains stretched out beneath them, a harsh, unforgiving landscape that had witnessed countless battles, and Cole couldn't help but wonder how many more lives would be lost in the coming days. But for now, he had to focus on what mattered, survival. As the helicopter banked sharply, Cole glanced over at Rex. The K-9 was panting heavily, his fur matted with dust and blood from the fight. Despite the chaos, Rex's eyes were sharp, unblinking, his body still tense, as though the danger hadn't fully passed. It never did for them. "You did, good boy." Cole whispered, his voice rough from the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He reached out and placed a hand on Rex's thick coat, the bond between them, unspoken, but stronger than ever. They had been through hell together, and each time they emerged, they were forged stronger. They were a team, and nothing could break that. The helicopter shot through the sky, the view below becoming a blur as they flew further from the mountains. But the relief was short-lived. Cole's mind raced as he processed everything that had just happened. The Taliban was still out there. They'd only just scratched the surface of the mission. The enemy's grip on the region was strong, and there would be more battles ahead, and more enemies to face. The helicopter's comms crackled to life, and a voice came through, gruff and urgent. "Cole, you're clear for extraction. Stand by for landing." Cole nodded, even though the pilot couldn't see him. He didn't need to say anything. He knew the mission was far from over. He turned his attention back to Rex, who was watching him with an almost knowing look in his eyes. They both understood that this moment of relief wouldn't last. They had escaped death today, but the war was far from over. As they neared the extraction point, the landscape below changed. The jagged peaks of the mountains gave way to the sprawling desert that stretched out into the horizon. The barren ground seemed endless, a desolate sea of sand and dust. It was a harsh reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. Cole's heart beat faster as the thought crossed his mind. If they thought they'd seen the worst of it, they were sorely mistaken. The helicopter touched down with a heavy thud, the ground vibrating under their feet as the rotor slowed. The door opened and a team of soldiers in full combat gear stepped forward, weapons at the ready. Their faces were hidden behind visors, but Cole could feel the tension in the air. They were prepared for whatever came next. "Cole, Rex, over here," one of the soldiers shouted, waving them over. Cole nodded sharply, grabbing Rex's collar and leading him toward the soldiers. As they moved, he kept his eyes trained on the horizon. The Taliban was still out there, and they would be hunting for him and his team. But for now, he had to focus on getting to safety. They needed to regroup. The soldiers quickly ushered them into a makeshift shelter, a small convoy of armored vehicles waiting for them. Cole's senses were still heightened, his every instinct screaming that danger was lurking just around the corner. But the moment they stepped into the shelter, the door slammed shut, sealing them off from the outside world. Cole exhaled sharply, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the battle. Rex sat at his feet looking up at him, his loyalty unwavering even in the face of uncertainty. "Good to see you, Cole," one of the soldiers said, clapping him on the shoulder. It was the team leader, a burly man with a rough voice and a grim expression. "You made it out in one piece." Cole offered a tight smile. "Barely, but we're here." As the rest of the team gathered around, checking their gear and securing the shelter, Cole couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. They had survived the mountain pass, but the war was far from over. There was still more to be done, more enemies to fight, and more lives to save. The team leader looked at Cole, his eyes scanning him with concern. "What's the situation with the Taliban? How many are left in the area?" Cole's brow furrowed as he considered the question. The brief moment of victory had faded, replaced by the harsh reality of the situation. "They're still out there. We took out their commander, but the rest of their forces are scattered. We've only delayed the inevitable. We'll need to be ready for their retaliation," the team leader said, his voice grim. "They're not going to give up easily." Cole nodded. "I know, but we've got a few more tricks up our sleeves." As the soldiers began to prepare for the next phase of the mission, Cole found himself staring at Rex, who was now lying quietly at his feet, his eyes half closed as if sensing the growing tension around them. But Cole knew that Rex was more than just a companion. He was a lifeline, the one who kept him grounded when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Together they had faced unimaginable odds and come out the other side, and together they would keep fighting no matter the cost. Suddenly, the shelter's comms crackled again, breaking the silence. "Cole, we've got intel. There's a Taliban supply convoy heading through the valley to the east. We need you and Rex to go after it." Cole's eyes narrowed. It was a dangerous mission, but it was exactly what they needed. The enemy was on the move, and if they could take out their supply lines, they'd hit the Taliban where it hurt the most. "I'm in, Cole," said his voice steely. "Let's move out." The team leader gave him a nod of approval. "Good. We'll provide air support." As Cole and Rex geared up for the next phase of their mission, Cole's heart beat with renewed purpose. This was it. The fight was far from over, but with Rex by his side, he knew they could take on whatever came their way. Together they would keep pushing forward, until the war was won. The desert stretched out like a barren wasteland, its endless dunes of sand shifting beneath the scorching sun. It was the perfect place for an ambush, a place where an enemy could blend into the landscape, waiting patiently for their prey to fall into their trap. And Cole knew the Taliban would use it to their advantage. Cole stood at the edge of the convoy's last known location, his gaze scanning the horizon. The convoy was just a few miles east, a clear target, but getting there wouldn't be easy. The valley was teeming with enemy patrols, and the Taliban would be expecting retaliation. The heat was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the storm of chaos that was about to unfold. Rex, standing tall beside him, sniffed the air, his ears twitching at every sound. His senses were sharp as ever. The K-9 was more than just a companion. He was the key to their survival. In the midst of all this danger, Rex was the calm in the storm, the unwavering presence that kept Cole grounded. "We can't waste any more time," Cole muttered, his voice gruff as the sweat trickled down his face. His hands gripped the rifle slung over his shoulder, ready for whatever was coming next. Cole turned to the team leader, a hardened man named Sergeant Daniels, who had been with him from the start of this mission. His eyes were cold, his expression unreadable as always, but Cole knew Daniels was just as aware of the stakes as he was. The convoy was the key to crippling the Taliban's supply line, and if they didn't act fast, the enemy would be gone before they could strike. "We move now," Daniels ordered. "And no slowing down. We get in, take them out, and get the hell out before they know what hit them." Cole nodded, his resolve hardening. There was no turning back now. The convoy was out there, somewhere in the valley, vulnerable, unaware of the storm bearing down on them, but they wouldn't be for long. With the team's skills, the element of surprise was their greatest weapon. "Rex," Cole called softly, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "Stay sharp. We're going in." Rex's ears perked up at the sound of his name, and in an instant he was by Cole's side, his body coiled like a spring ready for action. The team set out quickly, their movements efficient and purposeful. They knew the terrain well, navigating the jagged ridges and narrow paths with precision. The wind kicked up dust as they moved the landscape, blurring around them in the heat. It wasn't just the physical challenge they had to face. It was the mental toll, the constant weight of knowing that death could be just a step behind them. Every sound, every rustle in the wind had Cole on edge. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not now. They crept closer to the valley's edge, the convoy's vehicles now visible through the dust and haze. It was a perfect target, but Cole knew it wouldn't be that easy. The Taliban weren't idiots. They would be watching for any signs of an ambush. The seconds felt like hours as they moved closer, the pounding of Cole's heart drowning out the sounds of his breathing. Everything was silent. Too silent. Then, suddenly, the sound of distant gunfire erupted, shattering the stillness. Cole froze, his body tensing. That wasn't part of the plan. Someone had triggered a fight. "Move!" Daniels barked, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Get to cover! They know we're here!" The team sprang into action, diving behind the nearest rocks, rifles raised and ready. Cole's pulse skyrocketed as he crouched, low, scanning for targets. Rex was at his side, moving with the same fluid precision that had saved them time and time again. "Rex, with me!" Cole shouted, his voice hoarse with adrenaline. Without hesitation, Rex bounded forward, his powerful legs propelling him into the fray. The K-9 was a blur of movement, his focus unwavering as he zeroed in on the enemy. Cole, rifle raised, followed close behind. The sound of gunfire intensified, the enemy returning fire from a hidden position on a ridge. Cole's breath came in short bursts as he darted from cover to cover, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and sweat. They were so close. Just a little further, and they would have the convoy in their sights. But then, a crack. A bullet whizzed past Cole's ear, missing by inches. His heart slammed in his chest as he dropped to the ground, the world around him narrowing down to the sharp focus of survival. "Keep moving," Daniels shouted from behind him, the urgency in his voice pushing Cole forward. "Don't stop! We've got this!" Cole pushed himself to his feet, muscles burning with exertion. Rex was already ahead of him, charging toward the nearest Taliban fighter. The K-9's speed was unmatched, and in a flash he was on the man, tearing into him with the force of a freight train. The Taliban soldier barely had time to scream before Rex had him pinned to the ground, his teeth sinking into the man's shoulder. Cole didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired the shot, ringing out with deadly precision. The enemy soldier dropped to the ground, his weapon slipping from his hands. But there was no time to celebrate the victory. The rest of the convoy was still moving, unaware of the chaos unfolding just a few yards away. Cole and his team had to act fast. "Rex, on me!" Cole yelled, his voice sharp. Rex, his fur coated in the blood of the enemy, bounded back to Cole's side, ready to continue the assault. The convoy was close now, within reach. They had to finish this. "Now!" Daniels yelled. The team surged forward in a coordinated rush, closing the distance to the convoy in mere moments. The Taliban fighters were distracted, scrambling to regroup and defend their supply line. But they didn't stand a chance against the precision and speed of Cole and his team. "Clear the path!" Cole shouted as they stormed the convoy. He and Rex moved as one, cutting through the enemy like a blade through silk. The remaining Taliban soldiers tried to mount a counterattack, but it was too late. Cole's rifle thundered in the air, cutting down enemies with ruthless efficiency. Rex was a blur of motion, his powerful jaws closing around the legs of another soldier as he dragged him down. Within minutes, the convoy was theirs. But the fight wasn't over. The sound of reinforcements was already growing louder, and Cole could hear the whine of approaching vehicles. "We've got a small window," Daniels said, his voice grim. "We need to secure this position and get to the extraction point. Fast." Cole glanced at Rex, his eyes meeting the K9's with an unspoken understanding. This was their fight, and they would see it through to the end. The sound of their victory was still ringing in Cole's ears when the silence shattered. The moment of triumph, fleeting as it was, had already begun to dissipate, replaced by the rising hum of engines, the unmistakable sound of reinforcements. Cole's grip tightened on his rifle as he scanned the convoy, his heartbeat now in sync with the ticking clock. He glanced at Daniels, who was already barking orders to the team. "They're coming," Cole said, his voice low but urgent. The words felt like an unspoken warning. The team had secured the convoy. The Taliban fighters had been wiped out, their supplies destroyed. But now the real fight was coming, a fight that would determine whether they could hold their ground or be overrun by enemy reinforcements. Rex stood by his side, his fur matted with the blood of their fallen enemies, eyes locked on Cole. He was ready. He was always ready. This was the moment they had been trained for, to face the storm head-on. "They've got vehicles and air support on the way." Daniel snapped, his voice hard as granite. "We need to hold this position, no matter what." The convoy was in disarray. Boxes of ammunition were scattered around fuel barrels, smoldering in the aftermath of their assault. But this wasn't over. It couldn't be. "We're sitting ducks here," Cole muttered, glancing back at the horizon. The dust kicked up in the distance. The first signs of the incoming enemy force. The Taliban wasn't going to let this defeat slide. And they were bringing everything they had. "Hold tight, everyone. It's not over yet," Daniels ordered as the team quickly set up defensive positions. They took cover behind the wrecked vehicles, rifles raised, eyes scanning the desert for any sign of movement. The wind picked up, swirling sand into their eyes, but they didn't flinch. Not now. In the distance, the first rumblings of heavy engines could be heard. It was like thunder coming from the east. "They're here," Cole said, his eyes narrowing. Rex growled low in his throat, sensing the impending danger. Cole knew what was coming, and it was going to be brutal. The first wave of enemy vehicles came into view, armored trucks kicking up sand as they barreled toward the convoy. Machine guns mounted on the trucks fired wildly, spraying bullets in every direction. The deafening sound of gunfire filled the air, and the ground beneath Cole's feet seemed to vibrate with the power of the oncoming assault. "Take cover!" Daniels shouted, ducking behind the wreckage of a supply truck as bullets tore through the air around them. Cole was already moving, his instincts kicking in. He dove behind a pile of crates, Rex close behind, and raised his rifle, scanning the enemy vehicles through his sights. The first truck was within range. It was coming straight for them. "Get ready," Daniels barked. "Fire!" Cole shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The air seemed to explode as gunfire erupted from every direction. The team opened fire, their bullets striking the incoming vehicles with deadly precision. A truck exploded in a fiery burst, metal fragments flying in all directions as the enemy screamed in panic. But there was no time to celebrate. The second wave was already coming. More trucks, more fighters. The desert was alive with the sound of war. The battlefield, a swirling, chaotic mess of dust, gunfire and screams. Cole's pulse surged as he fired again, his shots hitting their marks. But it wasn't enough. The enemy was relentless. And then, as if to make things worse, the first helicopter appeared on the horizon. Its whirring blades cut through the air, a sleek black silhouette against the sky. The Taliban had air support. "Damn it," Cole hissed as he ducked low, narrowly avoiding a barrage of bullets from the helicopter's mounted gun. He quickly scanned the wreckage for something to use against it. "Rex!" Cole shouted. "Cover me!" Without hesitation, Rex was off, charging through the dust, a blur of fury. He leaped onto a nearby Taliban soldier, knocking him to the ground with a force that sent the man sprawling. The K9's teeth sank into the soldier's arm as Cole used the distraction to sprint toward a nearby crate of explosives. "Got it," Cole yelled, gripping the detonator tightly in his hand. He could feel the heat of the helicopter's fire raining down on him, but he didn't flinch. He had to act fast. With a deep breath, Cole set the explosives. The timer was ticking. The helicopter was only moments away from finishing them off. "Move!" Daniel shouted, waving Cole toward him. Rex was already back by Cole's side, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was ready for the next round of fighting, but Cole wasn't going to wait for that. They had to finish it now. With one final look toward the incoming chopper, Cole slammed his finger down on the detonator. A massive explosion erupted the shockwave, sending dust and debris flying in all directions. The helicopter screeched as flames erupted from its engine. The air filled with the sound of metal groaning and twisting. It plummeted to the ground, crashing in a fiery blaze. Cole exhaled, heart racing. The chopper was down, but the battle was far from over. "Air support's down!" Daniel shouted over the radio. "We need to push them back now!" Cole didn't wait for orders. He leaped into action, rallying the team, leading them forward with a steady hand. They couldn't give up now, not when they were this close to victory. The enemy was regrouping, but they were scattered, vulnerable. Cole and his team were relentless. Every step, every shot was calculated, their every movement with one purpose: to survive. But as the smoke began to clear, Cole realized one thing. This wasn't just another fight. It was the turning point. With Rex at his side, Cole knew they had a chance. The Taliban's grip on the region was weakening, and this battle, this fight, would be the one that would decide everything, and they weren't going to lose. The battlefield was a maelstrom, a hellscape of fire and dust. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, casting long shadows over the wreckage of the convoy. But the chaos only fueled the fire within Cole. His heartbeat was a drum in his chest, syncing with the rhythm of the fight. Every breath, every move was sharp. Survival was no longer just a goal. It was a necessity. "We need to finish this!" Daniel shouted, his voice strained but resolute. His team was scattered across the wreckage, taking cover behind twisted metal and sandbanks. But Cole could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure mounting. The reinforcements were relentless, and they knew exactly where to strike. The Taliban wasn't just fighting for control. They were fighting for their lives. Cole's rifle was hot in his hands as he fired each shot a precise strike in the growing storm of gunfire. The enemy was closing in, but they had underestimated the fury of Cole and his team. Rex, bloodied but unyielding, stood by his side. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that mirrored Cole's own. The bond between them was something primal, something that no amount of gunfire or explosions could sever. A fresh wave of fighters emerged from the rising dust, a cluster of soldiers armed to the teeth. They came from all sides, the sound of their boots pounding the earth, echoing like thunder. There was no time for hesitation, no time for second thoughts. This was the moment that would define them. "Push forward!" Cole roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. He sprang to his feet, racing toward the oncoming enemy with reckless abandon. The weight of his rifle felt like 1,000 pounds, but it was nothing compared to the burning need for vengeance, for survival. Rex was at his side, his jaw snapping as they tore through the air. The K9 was unstoppable, a blur of fury and speed, charging toward the enemy like a beast unleashed. His growls mixed with the sharp cracks of gunfire, his body moving with an energy that defied the exhaustion that should have been pulling them both down. He was more than just a companion now. He was Cole's right hand, a partner in this nightmare. The Taliban soldiers, though well trained, were caught off guard by the ferocity of the counterattack. They scrambled to regroup, but they were no match for the precision and speed of Cole's team. Gunfire rang. Out in every direction, the sounds blending into a deafening symphony of war. Cole could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that they were losing ground. Fast. But there was no time to savor their advantage. A truck to Cole's left exploded in a violent flash of fire and smoke, sending debris flying in all directions. The shockwave hit Cole like a sledgehammer, knocking him off balance. His ears rang from the blast, and for a moment everything was just a blur of smoke and chaos. "Cole!" Daniel screamed. "Get up!" The world snapped back into focus as Cole pushed himself off the ground, his legs shaky but firm. Rex was already ahead of him, leaping over a sand dune, teeth bared on the hunt. Cole was right behind him. His body was sore, his mind barely hanging on to coherence, but he didn't care. He couldn't. Not now. The remaining Taliban fighters were scrambling for cover, but they were being picked off one by one. The K9s had torn through their ranks, and now Cole's team was closing in. They had them cornered, but just as victory seemed within reach, a thunderous roar pierced the air, the sound of helicopter blades. "Damn it!" Daniels growled. "More air support!" The helicopter's roar grew louder, and before anyone could react, the first missile shot through the air, slicing the sky like a blade. Cole's heart skipped a beat. It was heading straight for them. "Take cover!" Cole shouted, diving to the side, pulling Rex with him. The explosion was a deafening scream. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the blast sent sand and debris into the air, choking the life out of the very space they occupied. Cole felt the heat of the explosion on his skin, and for a moment he was weightless, as if time itself had stopped. But it hadn't. When the dust settled, Cole was gasping for air, his body aching from the impact. Rex was beside him, his fur singed, but his eyes blazing with fury. "We're not done yet," Cole muttered through gritted teeth. His voice was barely audible over the sound of the helicopter's engines, but his determination rang clear. They had one shot at this. Cole turned to Daniels, his expression hard and unforgiving. "We're taking that chopper down. Now." The team was already moving their focus sharp. Cole's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for the threat. The Taliban weren't just throwing vehicles at them now. They were throwing everything. And this helicopter, it was their ace in the hole. "Rex with me," Cole said, his voice barely a whisper. Rex barked in response, his tail stiffening. They were already moving, running toward the open expanse of the desert where the helicopter was circling above. Cole's pulse was a drumbeat, thundering in his chest as he sprinted forward, his eyes never leaving the whirling death above. They had to outmaneuver it. They had to get close enough to take it down. The chopper hovered low, the gunner manning the mounted machine gun. The roar of the helicopter's engines drowned out everything else as the heavy thudding of the gun began. Bullets zipped by, kicking up sand, but Cole didn't stop. He dove behind a rock just as the chopper's gunner adjusted fire, barely missing him. "This is it!" Daniels shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "We've got to get to it. Now!" Cole's heart pounded in his chest as he darted forward, running through the dust, his body moving on pure adrenaline. Rex was right by his side, leaping over obstacles, a relentless force of nature. The K-9 was moving faster than any man, closing the distance between them and the chopper. They were almost there. With a final burst of speed, Cole reached the launch pad area. His hands outstretched, his fingers grazing the mounted explosives. He set them in place in seconds, his eyes wild with focus. "Rex, stay!" he ordered, his voice low but filled with urgency. The K-9 was already poised, ready to act. Cole activated the detonator. Boom! The explosion rocked the helicopter, sending it into a spiraling freefall. It plummeted toward the earth flames trailing behind it. The impact was deafening, and the dust cloud that followed blotted out the sun. Cole fell to his knees, the force of the explosion pushing him down. His chest heaved as he gasped for breath. But they had done it. The helicopter was gone. The fight was far from over, but with the air support neutralized, they had a real chance at winning. With the battlefield now eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of enemy footsteps, Cole rose, looking around. The remnants of the convoy smoldered in the sun. The Taliban forces were scattering, trying to regroup. But they had lost. They knew it. And now they would feel the wrath of a force they had underestimated. But Cole wasn't done. Not yet. He had to finish this. He had to make sure that after all this they could leave with their lives and a victory. The dust from the helicopter's destruction had barely settled when a new, more terrifying sound filled the air. It was like the earth itself had shifted. A rumble that started low but grew louder by the second. Cole's senses flared, every instinct screaming at him. Something wasn't right. "Get ready!" Daniels bellowed, pulling Cole back behind the smoldering wreckage. His eyes darted around as the ground beneath them shook again, this time more violently. Rex growled low, his fur bristling. The K-9's ears flattened and his body tensed, ready to charge once again. Cole could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't over. The Taliban's forces were regathering and they weren't backing down. And then they appeared. Out of the smoke, a convoy of armored vehicles. Hundreds of them emerged from the desert. The enemy wasn't running away. They were bringing in their heavy artillery, and a hell of a lot more firepower. "They've got reinforcements," Cole muttered, eyes wide. His fingers clenched around his rifle. This wasn't just a handful of soldiers anymore. This was an army. "Fall back," Daniel shouted. But it was too late. The enemy was already in position, flanking them from all sides. Tanks rumbled forward, their heavy cannons pointing directly at their positions. The sound of rotating turrets was deafening, and Cole could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. This was it. If they didn't make a stand now, they wouldn't make it out alive. The first round of tank fire tore through the ground, sending dirt and debris flying. Cole's heart skipped a beat as the blast crashed into the rock where he had just been standing. The air was thick, with the smell of burning metal and the sharp stench of gunpowder. The explosions felt like they were coming from every direction. "Find cover!" Daniels shouted, pulling Cole into a nearby trench. Rex was right behind them, his paws digging into the sand as he sprinted. Cole could barely hear his own thoughts over the deafening roar of artillery fire. But his mind was clear on one thing. This was their last stand. There was no retreat now. The enemy's assault was too overwhelming, and they were too deep in enemy territory to escape. "Cole!" Daniels grabbed his arm, his voice urgent. "We need to take out their tanks." "We've got no chance unless we do." Cole's eyes locked on the tanks. Their massive barrels pointed directly at them. He could feel the heat of their fire even from this distance. He knew they were outgunned and outnumbered, but he wasn't about to let that be the end of it. "I've got an idea," Cole said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. He turned to Rex, who was now crouching low, his eyes alert, his muscles coiled like a spring. Cole knew Rex understood. The K-9 had been with him through every firefight, every battle. They were a team, and now they would make their final charge together. "Cover me," Cole ordered Daniels before sprinting toward the enemy tanks. "Are you insane?" Daniels shouted after him, but Cole was already moving, sprinting across the battlefield toward a cluster of abandoned vehicles. Rex was by his side, leaping over rocks, his growls cutting through the air. The K-9's pace was blistering his body a blur as he followed Cole's every move. There was no time to second-guess their plan. This was the only shot they had. As they neared the wrecked vehicles, Cole spotted the perfect target, a single tank with a vulnerable side just waiting to be taken down. He sprinted toward it, ducking behind a damaged Jeep for cover, his heart hammering in his chest. The tank turret spun in his direction, its cannon locking onto his position. "Shit!" Cole hissed under his breath. He didn't have much time. With a single determined motion, Cole tossed an explosive device he had scavenged earlier, aiming for the weak spot in the tank's armor. Rex barked, warning him of an approaching enemy soldier, but Cole didn't hesitate. He triggered the device, sending it hurtling toward the tank. Time seemed to stretch out as Cole dove behind a boulder. Then it happened. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave that rocked the ground beneath them. The tank erupted in flames, the force of the blast throwing debris into the air like confetti. The enemy tank crew was obliterated, their firepower neutralized in a flash of blinding light. "Did you see that?" Daniels screamed, his voice full of awe. "Nice job, Cole!" But Cole wasn't done yet. There was still more to do. The rest of the tanks were still moving in, and they had no time to wait for reinforcements. Cole's mind raced. He couldn't waste a single moment. "Let's move," Cole shouted, signaling to the rest of the team. They had to make their move now before the tanks could reload or reposition. Rex led the charge, darting across the open field with unbelievable speed. He was a blur of motion, taking down enemy soldiers in his path as Cole followed close behind, firing his rifle. The adrenaline was a tide that coursed through his veins. Every shot was instinctual, precise, cutting down the enemies as they tried to regroup. But the tanks weren't backing off. Another round of tank fire rang out, and Cole dove to the side, narrowly avoiding being vaporized by the blast. The ground trembled as the cannon rounds exploded in every direction. And then something changed. Cole saw it. Through the smoke and dust, a group of Taliban soldiers was charging toward them, brandishing Alaska 47s and RPGs. They were planning to rush in, to finish them off once and for all. "Cover the left flank." Cole shouted to Daniels, who immediately responded, firing into the charging enemy with deadly accuracy. The squad was scattered, but they moved with military precision, using the wreckage of destroyed vehicles as cover. Rex was in the thick of it, weaving in and out of enemy lines, his teeth tearing into flesh as he took down anyone foolish enough to get close. Cole's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted to catch up with Rex. The K-9 was unstoppable, a force of nature in the chaos. His every move was calculated, efficient. But as Cole moved forward, a flash of movement caught his eye. One of the Taliban soldiers had broken through their defenses, sneaking around their left flank. He raised an RPG and aimed at Rex. "No!" Cole screamed as he dove toward the soldier, his rifle raising to fire. The shot rang out, and the Taliban soldier crumpled to the ground, the RPG falling from his hands just inches from Rex's head. The K-9 stopped turning to look at Cole. His eyes met. Cole's with an intensity that spoke volumes. They had survived the storm. But it wasn't over yet. The dust began to settle after the chaotic battles, but the aftermath felt strangely hollow. The sound of gunfire had diminished, replaced by an eerie quiet that stretched over the battlefield. The enemy had been pushed back, but the cost was undeniable. The survivors, Cole's team included, moved with heavy steps, their bodies sore, their minds consumed by the events they'd just endured. Rex, still alert, his fur singed in places, walked beside Cole. The K-9's posture was less tense now, but his eyes still held a sharp focus. He knew something wasn't right. Neither Cole nor Daniels could shake the feeling that this wasn't over. But for now, the air was thick with exhaustion, and the team simply couldn't push any further. They needed rest. They needed to regroup. Cole leaned against a cracked piece of debris, wiping the sweat and grime from his brow. His fingers were stiff from the rifle he'd been clutching for hours, but he barely noticed the pain. His body was worn down, but it wasn't the physical fatigue that bothered him. It was the weight of what lay ahead. "We can't rest here long," Daniel said, wiping blood from his cheek, his voice strained. "They'll regroup. They'll hit us again." Cole didn't respond immediately. He knew Daniels was right. The enemy wasn't finished, and as much as he wanted to believe they'd won deep down, he understood that this was only a temporary victory. But they didn't have the luxury of time to make a real plan. Every minute they waited gave the Taliban a chance to reorganize. "Let's get to higher ground," Cole finally said, his voice low but steady. "We need to keep moving." The squad nodded, and with one last glance at the still-burning wreckage, they began to climb toward a nearby ridge. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The horizon was tinged with the faint orange glow of dusk, a reminder of how quickly the day had turned into night. But the beauty of the sunset felt cold to Cole, as if nature itself was mocking the destruction that had taken place. Rex trotted ahead of him, sniffing the air. His instincts were sharper than ever. They all knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Once they reached the top of the ridge, Cole looked back over the battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. The world stretched out before him, desolate, unforgiving, and now eerily still. The distant sound of helicopters could be heard faintly, their rotors a constant reminder that the war wasn't over. It was just a matter of time before the next wave hit. "Keep watch," Cole said, addressing his team. "We'll make camp here for the night, but be ready to move at a moment's notice." The others set up a defensive perimeter, their movements automatic, like soldiers who had long since learned the art of survival. Rex circled the area, ensuring the perimeter was secure. Cole found a spot next to a pile of rocks and slumped down, his body too tired to do much else. He pulled out a ration bar from his pack and chewed mechanically, his mind elsewhere. The last few hours had been a blur of gunfire explosions and a constant struggle to stay alive. And yet it wasn't the battles that haunted him. It was the faces of the men and women who had fallen, the comrades who had given everything for this mission. Cole closed his eyes, trying to block out the memories, but it was impossible. They lingered like ghosts, every face a reminder of the cost of war. Rex returned to Cole's side, lying down next to him, his head resting on his paws. There was comfort in the dog's presence. Rex wasn't just a soldier in this war. He was Cole's lifeline, a constant in a world that felt like it was constantly shifting. A crackling noise broke the silence. It was coming from the radio. Daniels had set up a comm system, and the low hum of static filled the air. Cole Daniels said over the crackle, "I've got something. Incoming transmission. High command. They want us to move out. Now." Cole's eyes flicked open, his heart rate quickening. He could hear the urgency in Daniel's voice. "Move out?" Cole asked, his voice tight. "We just fought off an entire brigade, and now they want us to move?" "They're sending reinforcements, but they need us to keep pushing. They're counting on us to hold this ground until backup arrives," Daniels replied. "You know the drill. We have to keep going." Cole clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. He knew the reality of war. There was no such thing as a break. Not now, not ever. But that didn't make it any easier. Every inch forward was a sacrifice, and it was taking its toll on him and his men. "Fine," Cole said, finally standing up. "We move out. But we need to stay sharp. The next wave could be worse. The team didn't hesitate. They packed up quickly, moving in silent coordination. Cole felt the weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about keeping the team alive long enough to see this mission through. They had been through too much to turn back now. As they prepared to leave, Cole's eyes lingered on the wreckage below. It was impossible to ignore the devastation, but there was no time for reflection. He had a mission to complete. The fate of his squad, and the men and women relying on them, was in his hands. "Let's move out," Cole said quietly. With Rex by his side, they began to descend the ridge. The air was colder now, and the silence felt oppressive. Each step felt heavier than the last, but Cole kept moving, knowing that the next fight was just around the corner. The night air was bitter, carrying the distant hum of helicopters overhead, and the unsettling silence of a battlefield temporarily abandoned. It wasn't a calm stillness. It was the kind of silence that precedes the next storm. The team moved quickly, making their way through the rugged terrain, keeping their eyes peeled for any signs of the enemy. But the dark shadows cast by the mountain ridges did nothing to ease their sense of dread. Rex moved silently in the lead, his nose twitching with every unfamiliar scent. The K9's movements were fluid, almost instinctual, as if he could sense the change in the wind. The others followed in a tight formation, their footsteps muted by the soft crunch of gravel beneath their boots. Cole glanced over at Daniels, who was at the front of the line, scanning the area with intensity. The exhaustion was evident in the lines on his face, but there was no time for rest. They had been ordered to move forward, and nothing short of another full-on assault would stop them now. "I don't like this," Daniels muttered, his voice barely a whisper in the darkness. "Too quiet." "It's too calm." Cole nodded, his hand resting on the rifle slung across his back. He felt the same unease gnawing at him. After all they had been through, they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Not now. Not when they were so close to their objective. "We stay vigilant," Cole said firmly. "Keep your eyes open. We're not done yet." The team pressed on, crossing a wide stretch of open ground, before reaching a small hill that overlooked a cluster of Taliban positions. In the distance, Cole could see the faint outlines of tents and vehicles, a small but heavily fortified encampment that was likely housing the rest of the enemy forces. The air was thick with tension as they approached. Rex search, Cole ordered, and the K9 immediately sprang into action. His body was a blur of movement as he sniffed along the ground, his ears pinned back and his eyes sharp. Cole had learned to trust Rex's instincts more than his own over the years, and right now Rex's alertness could be the difference between life and death. As they neared the edge of the hill, Cole crouched down behind a large rock, motioning for the others to follow suit. He peered through his binoculars, scanning the camp below. The camp was relatively quiet, but there were signs of activity. The faint flicker of light from a campfire, the silhouettes of soldiers moving in and out of tents. "They're here," Cole muttered, lowering the binoculars. "And they're ready for a fight. Any way to get closer without being seen?" Daniels asked, his voice low and steady. Cole thought for a moment, his mind working through the options. The terrain was rugged, but it provided some cover. There was a narrow ravine that could allow them to close the distance without being spotted. But it would take time, and they didn't have the luxury of time. "There's a ravine about 50 yards to the left. We can use it to get closer, but we'll need to move fast," Cole said, his eyes flicking to Rex, who had stopped, ears up, waiting for his next command. "I'll lead," Daniel said as he moved forward. "Follow me." The team followed, their movements careful but determined, hearts pounding as they crept closer to the enemy camp. Rex led the way, his nose twitching as he moved through the dark. Every step brought them closer to the fight that was about to unfold. As they neared the camp, Cole could feel the weight of the moment settle over him. This was the final push. They had come too far to turn back now, but the risks were higher than ever. The enemy forces were well entrenched, and it would take everything they had to break through. "Get in position," Cole whispered as they reached the edge of the ravine, his eyes scanning the enemy camp below. They were in range now, but they couldn't rush in. They needed to be methodical. Stealth was their best weapon. Cole motioned for Daniels to lead the way. Daniels moved with military precision, signaling the others to follow. The K9's instincts were spot on, guiding them through the rocky terrain without alerting the enemy. They reached a ridge just above the camp, overlooking the Taliban's positions. It was the perfect vantage point, offering a clear view of the enemy's command tent and the scattered soldier positions. "We hit them hard, hit them fast," Cole said, his voice a low growl. "Rex on me. Let's clear the perimeter." The K9 was already in motion, charging forward without hesitation. Rex's instincts were razor sharp, and he moved with the speed and precision that only a trained K9 could possess. The enemy soldiers below didn't even see him coming. With a sharp, deafening bark, Rex lunged at the first soldier he encountered. The Taliban fighter barely had time to react before Rex's jaws locked onto his arm, pulling him to the ground. The rest of the team opened fire, taking out enemy soldiers with deadly accuracy. The camp erupted into chaos, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the air. "Push forward!" Cole shouted as he led the charge down the ridge. The team was now in full assault mode, moving quickly and decisively. Every shot, every movement was calculated. They had one objective: to neutralize the enemy's command and cripple their remaining forces. The battle was fierce. Explosions rocked the camp, sending soldiers scrambling for cover. The Taliban fought back with everything they had, but Cole's team was relentless. Rex tore through the enemy lines with a savage fury, while Cole and the others provided cover fire, picking off any remaining threats. In the midst of the chaos, Cole spotted the leader of the Taliban forces, a tall man wearing a dark turban and a long black robe. He was barking orders at his men, unaware of the impending doom. Cole's hand tightened around his rifle. This was it. The final target. Daniels. "I've got him," Cole said. He moved forward, keeping low to the ground every step, bringing him closer to his target. The leader was right ahead, his back turned, still shouting orders. Cole's heart raced, his mind clear with purpose. He raised his rifle, aimed for the target, and fired. The sound of gunfire had barely subsided when Cole took his first step onto the wreckage of the enemy camp. The place was in ruins, torn apart by the fury of the assault. Explosions still echoed faintly in the distance, a constant reminder of the violence that had unfolded. The smell of burning flesh and equipment lingered in the air, a stinging odor that Cole would never forget. Rex, covered in dirt and blood, moved to Cole's side, his body alert though his eyes were weary. The K9 was unrecognizable from the clean, perfectly groomed dog he had been when the mission began. But now there was no time for reflection or recovery. Cole knew the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The squad gathered in the center of the camp, their faces grim but their eyes burning with the fire of survival. They had accomplished their objective. They had neutralized the Taliban leader. But the cost had been high. "We did it," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "But we're not done yet, are we?" Cole shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. He knew what Daniels was thinking. They had killed the leader, but there was no way to know if this was the end of the Taliban presence in the area. It was too early to say for sure. The mission wasn't over until they had made sure every last enemy combatant was neutralized. "We bought ourselves some time," Cole replied, his voice steady. "But we need to keep moving. They'll send reinforcements soon." The squad didn't argue. They had been through too much together to hesitate now. They knew what needed to be done, Rex Cole said, looking down at his dog. The K9's ears pricked up at the sound of his name, his eyes still locked on his handler, ready for the next command. "Stay alert. We might have more company coming." Rex gave a low growl, his body stiffening as he scanned the area. The dog could sense the threat before anyone else, his instincts honed from years of service. He was more than just a companion now. He was the squad's lifeline. As they moved through the camp, Cole's eyes were drawn to the bodies scattered across the ground. Some were Taliban soldiers, their faces twisted in the agony of their last moments. Others were civilians caught in the crossfire, innocent lives lost in the chaos of war. Cole couldn't help but feel the weight of it. Each life lost was a reminder of the toll this conflict had taken on everyone. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line, that there would be no coming back from this. The violence, the destruction, it all seemed so senseless. But Cole knew there was no room for doubt in war. It was survival, plain and simple. And right now, survival was the only thing that mattered. They reached the center of the camp where the Taliban leader had been. The body was gone, taken by his men before Cole and his squad could confirm the kill. But there was no time to search for him. They needed to move. "Let's go," Cole commanded, his voice sharp. "We've got one more objective. We can't leave this area until we're sure it's clear." The squad moved out, their steps heavy with exhaustion, but their resolve unbroken. They knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they also knew they couldn't afford to slow down. If they did, they'd risk losing everything they had fought for. Rex led the way again, sniffing the air, as if he could sense every shift in the atmosphere. The K9's body language was tense, his muscles coiled, ready for whatever came next. They reached the outskirts of the camp, where a series of trucks and armored vehicles were parked. The vehicles were abandoned, their engines cold, but there was a sense of unease in the air. Something didn't feel right. "Watch for traps," Cole said quietly. "This could be an ambush." The team spread out, their rifles raised, scanning every corner for signs of movement. But there was nothing. The place was eerily quiet, as if the battle had been nothing but a dream. Clear Daniel said, his voice low. No signs of reinforcements. For a brief moment, the squad allowed themselves to breathe. It was a small victory, but it was still a victory. But Cole didn't relax. Not for a second. The mission wasn't over until they were safely out of enemy territory. "All right," Cole said, his voice filled with authority. "We're moving out, double time. Keep your eyes open." The squad turned and began to retreat, keeping their formation tight. Rex trotted beside Cole, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Every rustle in the wind, every distant sound made the K9's ears twitch. As they moved farther from the camp, Cole couldn't help but think about the cost of their mission. The lives lost, the comrades who wouldn't make it out of here, the soldiers who had given everything in the name of survival. They had succeeded, but at what cost? Was the sacrifice worth the victory? "Stay focused," Daniel said, as if reading Cole's mind. "We made it this far. We'll make it out." Cole nodded, but his thoughts remained heavy. It wasn't just the battle they had won. It was the long-lasting scars left on everyone who had fought in it. Rex stayed close, as if he could sense Cole's turmoil. The bond between handler and dog was unspoken, but undeniable. Together, they had survived the impossible. But Cole knew that survival didn't always mean victory. The dust was settling both on the battlefield and in Cole's mind. The adrenaline rush that had carried him through the chaos was beginning to fade, and with it, the weight of exhaustion came crashing down. The deafening noise of battle had been replaced by an eerie calm. The helicopter that would carry them back to base was still a distant hum in the sky, but for now, they were alone in the aftermath. The once bustling camp, now reduced to a wasteland of twisted metal, burned-out vehicles, and broken tents, felt desolate. Despite the victory, the emptiness lingered. Victory had a price, and that price weighed heavily on Cole's shoulders. He looked around at the men beside him, Daniels, Mitchell, Rodriguez, and the others, all silently processing the horror they had just witnessed. "Is it over?" Mitchell asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the distant helicopter blades. Cole looked at the horizon, the last streaks of the sun dipping beneath the mountains. "No, it's never over," he replied quietly. "But it's done for now. We've cleared out their leadership. We've disrupted their forces. That buys us time." But even as the words left his lips, Cole knew that this was just a temporary respite. The war would continue. The Taliban would regroup, find new leaders, and rebuild their forces. This battle, like so many others, was a step in a never-ending struggle. Rex was still beside him, though the dog's usual energy had been replaced with something softer, more subdued. The K9's fur was matted with dirt and blood, his body covered in the evidence of the fight. But Rex's eyes, those eyes that had seen so much, still gleamed with unwavering loyalty and readiness. Even after everything they had been through, he was still ready to move forward. Cole crouched down beside him, gently patting Rex's head. "You're one hell of a dog, you know that?" he whispered. Rex responded with a soft nudge against Cole's hand, as if acknowledging the praise. There was no need for words between them. The bond they shared was unspoken, forged through years of service, danger, and survival. "We'll get you cleaned up," Cole muttered, standing back up. "Soon as we're back." The rest of the team had begun to gather their gear, loading up the last of the supplies, and checking weapons one final time. The helicopter was still some distance away, but it wouldn't be long before they could leave this place behind. The rubble, the heat, the lingering sense of danger. But there was one more thing they had to do before they could fully move on. They needed to honor their fallen comrades. Cole led the way toward the makeshift grave that had been prepared for the 2 soldiers they had lost during the assault. The graves were simple, unadorned with any markers except for a few rough-hewn crosses made from spare wood. But to Cole, these graves meant everything. These men, these warriors who had stood beside him in the darkest of times, deserved more than a nameless grave in the dust. He dropped to his knees beside the graves, his hand resting on the dirt. "We'll never forget you," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. Your sacrifice won't be in vain." Daniels Mitchell and the others stood behind him, their heads bowed. No one spoke, no one needed to. The silence was the only tribute they could offer. After a long moment, Cole stood wiping the dust from his knees. "We're not done," he said, firmly turning to face his team. "We have a job to finish. Let's head back. We've got a long road ahead of us." They moved as one, heading toward the extraction point where the helicopter would soon land. The air was thick with the weight of everything they had experienced, but the mission wasn't over yet. There was no time to rest, no time to reflect. They had to keep moving. As they approached the chopper, Cole glanced at Rex one more time. The K-9's eyes were steady, his ears perked up as if sensing something in the distance. For a brief moment, Cole allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just maybe, Rex could see the future. Maybe he knew that they were still needed. The war wasn't over, and there would be more battles to fight. The helicopter touched down, its blades whirling, and the team boarded without hesitation. They took their seats, and for a moment, the noise of the chopper drowned out everything else. The wind rushed by, and the harsh reality of the battlefield was left behind. But even as the helicopter lifted off the ground, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The weight of the loss, the uncertainty of the future, it all weighed on him. He looked out of the window, watching the mountains grow smaller beneath them. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Rex, his faithful companion, sat beside him, eyes trained on the horizon. As long as they were together, as long as they fought side by side, Cole knew they could face whatever came next. "Let's go home, boy," Cole said quietly, his hand resting on Rex's head. The K-9 responded with a soft nudge, as if acknowledging their shared journey. And with that, the team flew into the unknown, carrying the weight of war, the cost of survival, and the hope for a future that might one day see peace. The chopper's engines roared, cutting through the silence of the Afghan landscape below. The soldiers sat in an uneasy quiet, the weight of their recent battle still heavy on their minds. Their eyes were distant, their bodies stiff from exhaustion. For many, the battle had felt like the culmination of years of war, but for Cole, it was just another chapter in the endless story of survival. He gazed out the window, watching the desert blur beneath them as they flew farther away from the ruins of the Taliban camp. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a blood-red hue over the mountains. Night was falling, and with it, a familiar darkness settled in the hearts of the soldiers. It was a silence that spoke louder than any words could. Rex sat beside Cole, his eyes scanning the horizon. The K-9 seemed calm, but Cole could sense that his companion too was tired. Rex had been through countless missions, battles, and dangers. He had seen things that no dog should ever have to see. But through it all, Rex had never faltered. His loyalty, his focus, it was what kept them both alive. "Good boy," Cole muttered, reaching down to scratch the dog's ear. Rex leaned into the touch, his tail thumping against the floor of the chopper. For a few moments, Cole let himself breathe, letting the rhythm of the chopper's flight soothe his weary mind. He had earned this moment of peace, but it was fleeting like everything else in this war. The next mission, the next battle, it was always just around the corner. "Hey, you all right?" Mitchell's voice broke through the silence. Cole turned to see his comrade sitting across from him, his face drawn, eyes tired but alert. Cole gave him a small nod, his lips curling into a tight smile. "Yeah, just thinking." Mitchell didn't press. He understood. They all did. The toll of war wasn't just physical, it was mental. Every battle, every mission left scars that no one could see. The weight of those memories, the faces of the fallen, haunted them in ways they could never escape. "How's Rex?" Mitchell asked, glancing at the dog. "Still going strong," Cole replied, his smile softening. "He's been through hell, but he never quits." Mitchell chuckled softly. "I don't know how you two do it. Every time I think I can't go on, you both just keep moving forward." Cole's eyes flicked to Rex, his gaze softening. "We don't have a choice. We keep going because we have to. It's what we do." Mitchell nodded, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "I just wish it didn't have to be this way. All this death." Cole let out a long breath, his eyes returning to the window. "I wish that too, more than anything. But this is the world we live in now, and as long as we're still standing, we have a job to do." The chopper bounced slightly as it flew over rough terrain, but the crew was used to the turbulence. The constant movement of war had become second nature to them. And yet, no matter how many times they flew over those desolate mountains, no matter how many times they faced the terror of battle, the harsh reality of what they were doing never quite settled in. The noise of the chopper seemed to fade into the background as Cole thought back to the mission, to the faces of the men they had lost, to the chaos that had unfolded at the camp. He thought about the innocent lives that had been torn apart by the conflict, the families who would never see their loved ones again. It was a bitter truth that no one could escape. But in those dark moments, Cole always returned to one thing: the bond he shared with Rex. It was the one constant in this chaotic world. The dog was more than just a companion. He was a symbol of survival, of resilience. No matter how many battles they fought, no matter how many enemies they faced, Rex was always there by his side. The dog was a reminder that as long as they had each other, they could endure anything. The helicopter made its descent, the ground approaching rapidly. As the chopper's wheels touched down, Cole felt the familiar jolt in his chest. The base was in sight, and with it the safety of home, or what passed for home in a war zone. The soldiers disembarked, stretching their stiff limbs and breathing in the dry, dusty air of the base. The sense of relief was immediate, but it was also temporary. The war didn't end when the helicopter landed. The battle would continue. There would be more missions, more dangers, more lives lost. It was a never-ending cycle. But for now, they had made it through another storm. Cole stood with Rex at his side, watching as his team filed into the base. He knew they would rest, regroup, and prepare for the next mission. But for a moment, just a brief moment, Cole allowed himself to savor the peace. He watched the men of his squad, each of them carrying their own burdens, their own memories of the battle they had just fought. They were brothers bound together by the chaos of war. And Rex. Rex was more than a soldier. He was family. The morning sun broke through the haze of dust and smoke, casting a harsh light over the base. The camp was still recovering from the previous day's events. The rumbling sounds of military trucks, the hurried movements of soldiers preparing for the next operation. Life on a military base was always in motion, never still. For Cole, it felt like the world never paused, not for a second. And even though they had just returned from the battlefield, there was no time to rest. The hum of helicopters filled the air as pilots checked their machines. Soldiers made their final preparations, and commanders barked orders to their teams. The steady rhythm of military life was relentless, and Cole couldn't help but feel that familiar tension creeping into his chest. He knew what came next. The brief respite they had earned was fleeting, and the call to action was inevitable. Cole stood by the operations tent, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his worn combat jacket. His eyes scanned the horizon, feeling the weight of the morning settle into his bones. Rex stood beside him, alert, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The dog always seemed to sense when something was coming, and Cole knew that Rex would be ready as always. Mitchell approached him, a grim look on his face. "Intel just came in. We've got another mission," he said quietly. Cole turned to meet his gaze, his heart sinking. "Another one?" "So soon?" Mitchell nodded. "Yeah. The Taliban regrouped faster than we anticipated. This time they've got a new weapon. They're hiding in a fortified compound deep in the mountains." Cole felt the knot in his stomach tighten. The Taliban had always been unpredictable, but the mention of a new weapon was a game changer. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, the enemy found a way to tip the scales in their favor. It was a constant battle of wits and survival. "What kind of weapon?" Cole asked, his voice low. "We don't have all the details, but it's something big," Mitchell replied. "Enough to change the tide of this war if they get their hands on it." Cole nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The stakes were higher than ever. He looked down at Rex, the dog's eyes locked on him, unwavering. Cole knew that Rex would be there as always. But this mission felt different. It wasn't just about taking down an enemy force. It was about stopping something that could tip the balance of power in the region. "All right," Cole said, his voice steady. "We go in, neutralize the threat, and get out. No mistakes." "Roger," that Mitchell said, with a firm nod. The squad quickly assembled, preparing for the mission ahead. Weapons were checked, gear adjusted, and final briefings given. The air around them crackled with tension. This mission would be a high-risk operation, one that could make or break their progress in the war. But it was also a mission they couldn't afford to fail. Cole stood with his team Rex by his side and took a deep breath. The adrenaline was already beginning to build, and he could feel his heart rate quicken in response. This was what they did. They fought, they survived. But that didn't make the fear any easier to handle. Fear was a constant companion in this line of work, something they had learned to manage even if they couldn't completely erase it. "Let's move out," Cole commanded, his voice sharp. "We have a job to do." The team filed out of the operations tent and made their way toward the transport vehicles. The sun was rising higher in the sky, and Cole could feel the weight of its heat already bearing down on them. The desert air was thick with dust, and the scent of diesel fumes mixed with the scent of the land, dry, harsh, and unforgiving. But it was their world now, the only one they knew. As they approached the vehicles, Cole took one last look at Rex. The K-9 was already in motion, eager to begin the mission. Rex was ready, and that was all that mattered. They moved as one, the bond between them unspoken, but unbreakable. The ride to the mountains was long and arduous, the terrain rough and treacherous. The convoy of military vehicles bounced over the uneven ground, the dust choking the air. The soldiers were silent, each lost in their own thoughts, as the looming mountain range grew closer with each passing minute. As they neared the compound, Cole's mind raced with possibilities. They had no idea what kind of weapon the Taliban was hiding, but the urgency in Mitchell's voice made it clear that it could be anything. A new bomb, chemical weapons, or something worse. Whatever it was, they had to stop it before it could be used against them, or worse, against innocent civilians. The compound came into view, nestled in a valley surrounded by jagged peaks. It was heavily fortified with high walls and watchtowers. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their silhouettes barely visible against the mountain backdrop. This was no ordinary hideout. This was a stronghold, a well-defended position that would require all of their skill and strategy to breach. Cole's jaw tightened. The stakes had never been higher. "We're almost there," he said to his team, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "Stay sharp. This is going to be a tough one." The team nodded, their faces hardening with determination. They had been through hell together, and they weren't about to let anything stop them now. Rex stood beside Cole, his ears perked, his tail still. The dog's eyes were locked onto the compound ahead, as if he too understood the gravity of the situation. Cole patted Rex on the head and gave him a silent nod of reassurance. They would get through this together just as they always did. The mission had begun. And there was no turning back. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of loyalty, courage, and the unforgettable bond between humans and animals. Share this video with your friends and family,